So, for me, life itself is an unexpected journey. To tell you a little bit about myself, I was born in Hong Kong. In our family, we were multilingual. My father spoke Spanish, Filipino, and English. My mother spoke, because she was born in Indonesia, she spoke Indonesian, Dutch, because Indonesia was a Dutch colony, and English. It's important because what I'm going to tell you about my life is, by growing up in a multicultural, multilingual society, this is what cast me today. If you're working in any sort of environment, be it here only in Kazakhstan or in America where there's so many different cultures and languages, it's very important to be able to understand each other. I started working in 1967. My first job was as a computer programmer. Mind map. Did somebody say mind map? Fantastic. You know, a mind map is something which I use every day. Everything that I do, virtually every decision that I make, every talk that I give, I mind map it. And it's a good way of putting down what's in your mind onto paper and looking at the various relationships. You hear me talk about relationships many times. Relationships between ideas, relationships between people, right? So what I'm going to tell you about is my journey. In 1973, I joined Arthur Andersen as an auditor, mainly because my original degree was in accounting. Actually, I didn't want to be an accountant. I wanted to be a lawyer. Unfortunately, I did not have enough money for law school, so I decided to enroll in this new university. At that time, it was a new university in Queensland. It is now called the University of Southern Queensland. It was 1967. And I enrolled in this university in the only course that I can afford, accounting. Accounting is a very good foundation for doing business. You look at the balance sheet, you look at the income statements, and you can understand a lot about businesses. In fact, when I started working as an auditor for Arthur Andersen, I was working mostly for financial services companies, banks, insurance companies, fund managers, and so on. And I think this is where I learned my financial expertise. Because my first job was as a computer programmer, Arthur Andersen thought, well, he knows accounting, he knows computer programming, so let's make him a consultant. So I became a consultant in 1980. 1990, I decided I had enough of working for other people. So I left Arthur Andersen and set up my own businesses. And finally, in 2013, I became a banker. So when people talk to me about banking, I said, look, I'm just a banker by accident. And this is actually one of the businesses that I had in Taiwan. And this is a recurring theme in my life's unexpected journey. I met a friend, and he said to me, he says, look, China has now opened up. And because China has now opened up, they have allowed Chinese tourists to visit Taiwan. And we need to do something for the tourists who are visiting Taiwan. And he says, let's set up a duty-free shop. I said, I know nothing about tourism, I know nothing about duty-free, but my friend had been working in the tourism business for 30 years. So he says, you may not know what to do, but I do. So I joined up with him, and we set up this duty-free business in Taiwan. And this is one thing which I think I'd like to pass on to all of you, is if you ever want to be an entrepreneur, find somebody who knows that business and make him your partner, or make her a partner, right? Because you need somebody who actually understands that business to guide you through all the difficulties that you're going to encounter. Because every business has different problems and different solutions. I think I told you just now, I became a consultant in 1980. And one of the things which I want all of you to think about, maybe not today, but in the future when you go to work. Okay? Today, all of you are searching for excellence. All of you are working very hard on your exam results. You're working very hard on the papers that you're writing, right? But oftentimes I find that when people leave the university environment, which is very competitive because you come from all the best schools in Kazakhstan, they suddenly become, well, this is my job and this is what I do, right? The most important thing is to gain recognition. When you go to work in a new job, you need to gain the recognition of your boss. Your boss is to say, without Camellia, right? Without Camellia, I can't get the job done. Your colleagues have to say, Aida knows everything there is to know about tax, for example, or marketing. If I have a problem, this is the person I go to, right? So, recognition. When you're at school, you get recognition because of your grades, your papers, your exam results, and so forth. When you're in a working environment, your recognition comes from your colleagues, the people around you. Help them, because by helping them, you're helping yourself. The best way to learn something is to try and explain it to other people. You need to gain the recognition of your boss and your boss's boss and the bosses of other units within the organization. For example, in our bank, we have people who are very good at risk management. When I took over the bank, I promoted everybody from within the bank, right? And I saw this young man. He's a KIMEP alumni, would you believe it? And he was our chief, He was chief underwriter for the bank. Now, what does an underwriter do in a bank? If you apply for a loan, the underwriter will look at your loan applications and analyze it and say, this person has the ability to repay the loan or not, right? So his job at that time was chief underwriter. So when we took over the bank, we decided that we wanted to be very conservative, very careful in the money that we lend to our clients. Why? The bank was actually owned by a Kazakh businessman. It was started 20-something years ago, almost at the same time as KIMEP University. He was very good at expanding the business, but unfortunately, fortunately for him, he sold the business to the Italians, UniCredit Bank of Italy, in 2007. Unfortunately for UniCredit Bank, that was when the market came crashing down, the global financial crisis. So when we took over the bank, 46% of our loan book was NPLs. What does it mean? Non-performing loans. The clients were not paying us back. They were not paying interest, they were not repaying the principals. 46% of our loan book. So when I took over the bank, I said, all right, for new clients, I want to be extremely careful, very, very conservative in lending. And I looked around and I found this young man, and he is very good. And I promoted him from being chief underwriter to head of corporate business, because I want somebody who's very careful, very conservative, making new business for me. All right? So recognition by your peers, recognition by your bosses is very important when you go out into the working world. Recognition is also important to create opportunities for yourselves. I was president of the Hong Kong Computer Society, mainly because of some of the projects that I had done in Hong Kong. I developed the computer system for the Housing Authority of Hong Kong. Now, Hong Kong has a population of 7 million people. Half of the 7 million people actually live in government housing. And the Hong Kong government needed to create this huge database of who is living in the government housing. Now, you get allocated housing based on a number of criteria. What happened after we developed this database? We found out that the same names were on multiple applications. Now, for example, the husband would include the wife's father and the wife's mother as part of the family living with him to get a little bit more space. But the wife's brothers and sisters did the same thing. So we found there's a lot of duplication. And we created the database system for the Hong Kong government. On the HKICPA, that's the Hong Kong Institute of Certified Public Accountants, I was recognized as being one of the more tough people on accounting problems, accounting frauds, and so on. And so I was called up and I was made a member of the disciplinary panel. So if an accountant, we're not talking about an accountant in a company, we're talking about auditors, okay? If an auditor signed off on the accounts and it turned out that the company did not make as much money, for example, or did not have as much assets as they said they would, it goes to the disciplinary committee. And we look at it and say, did the auditor make any mistakes in the audit? If they did make mistakes, how do we handle this mistake? Was it a honest mistake, or was it a fraud? And no, we would even go to the extent of levying a fine on the auditor, or even removing his audit license. What else? On October 19, 2087, 1987, last year was anniversary. The stock market around the world crashed. And the crash in Hong Kong was particularly bad because they had to close the stock market for 2 weeks. And why did they have to close the stock market for 2 weeks? Because they were not able to settle all the trades between brokers. Now, up until that time, stockbrokers have what we call physical script settlement. So we did not use computers for settlements. So if I sell you some shares, I give you a piece of paper, the share certificate, let's say 1 million shares of HSBC, all right? And you give me a check for the amount that you bought for your clients. Now, why is that a problem? The problem is that your client may decide tomorrow, or even on the same day, to sell half of those shares. You can't tear up the piece of paper. What do you need to do? You need to take the share certificate to the company registrar. The company registrar will break it into 2 pieces, give you 2 pieces of paper, and you go back and you say to the client, okay, I can sell 1 piece. But what happens if the day after that the client wants to sell some more? So usually what happens is the stockbrokers keep all the share certificates in the lowest common denominator. So for example, for HSBC, the lowest common denominator was 400 shares per certificate. So you can't sell less than 400. You sell 400 shares or 800 or 1,200 and so on. So, but can you imagine if you have 1 million shares of HSBC and each certificate is 400 shares, you have a stack that high, okay? A stack of paper that high. And each certificate, on the back of it, you need to sign. The broker selling the shares have to sign that this was a real sale and put a stamp on it. So the effort involved in settlement of trading on the Hong Kong Stock Exchange meant that nobody knew where everything is. Because of what I had done at in computerizing the Hong Kong Government Housing Authority, and because all my clients were banks, custodian banks, fund management companies, stockbrokers, and so on, they asked me to redesign the whole settlement system for Hong Kong. And I spent 2 years doing that. I redesigned the settlement system for Hong Kong, and it's called CCAS. It's called Central Clearing and Settlement System, and it's still in use today. From 1987 was the crisis. We finished the design 1989. We completed the implementation in 1991. It's still being used today. And because of that, I met many friends in the financial services industries. I met many stockbrokers. I met many fund managers, bankers, and so on. And one day, I was walking down the street, and I met this friend of mine who's a partner in Pricewaterhouse. At that time, it was called Pricewaterhouse, not PricewaterhouseCoopers. And he says, Tony, because of this financial crisis, one of the clients have gone out of business and they want to sell the stockbroking license. And he says, Tony, you know so many stockbrokers because of this project. Do you know anyone who wants to buy it? I said, Spoker, how much? And he says, it's 50,000 US dollars. I said, okay, I'll buy that. And so I bought a seat on the Hong Kong Stock Exchange, and from being a consultant, I became a stockbroker. So, talk about unexpected journeys. I went from programmer to auditor to consultant to stockbroker. So I was elected because I became a stockbroker, and I helped to redesign the settlement clearing system. I helped to rewrite the securities laws in Hong Kong together with the SFC. I was elected chairman of the Hong Kong Securities Association. So one thing led to another, right? And it goes back to what I said to you earlier on, gain the recognition of your peers. And because what happens then is opportunities are open to you. So why is it important to Hong Kong Securities Association? Because in the year 2007, I received a phone call from the financial secretary, the Minister of Finance. He says, Tony, we're going to Kazakhstan. Now, let me tell you, when I was chairman of the association, I made at least one trip per month overseas on behalf of the securities industries in Hong Kong, trying to attract companies to come and list the shares on the Hong Kong Stock Exchange. So anyway, he called and he says, Tony, we're going to Kazakhstan. I said, thank you very much, but I'm not going to any countries called Stan. Because at that time, the only stans I knew were Pakistan and Afghanistan, and I had no intention of going to those two stans. He says, look, Tony, you don't understand. Go and Google it. Look it up on Google. But in any case, as the chairman of the association, it's your job to go. In 2007, I came here with the finance minister. It's this fat guy on this side. I took him to the Green Bazaar. Why? Because his name is Frederick Ma, M-A. Now, Ma in Chinese can mean mother, like Ma, or horse, Ma. And I took him to the green market in particular to show him that we eat horses in Kazakhstan. I came with him. I made a lot of friends here, including the shareholder of the bank, Mr. Yessenov. And we started doing a lot of transactions together. What he would do is he would find projects in Kazakhstan that needs investors, and I would find investors from China and Hong Kong who wants to invest in Kazakhstan. And so we did this for a couple of years. In 2012, we were in London when he said, Tony, I hear that UniCredit Bank is selling ATF. Let's go and talk to UniCredit. So we flew from London to Milan, and we started talking to UniCredit. Now, I thought I was going to spend maybe a day or two talking to UniCredit. I finished up spending 8 months living in Milan. We did the due diligence of the bank in Milan, and we negotiated the sales and purchase agreement. Now, we did all that outside of Kazakhstan. Why? Because if we were to come to Kazakhstan and we did a due diligence in Kazakhstan, the clients of the bank would be scared. They would be afraid. They don't know who's going to buy the bank. The staff, our colleagues would be afraid. They'll be looking for other jobs in other banks and so on. And worst case, if we, after looking at the due diligence, we decide not to buy the bank, that's even worse, right? So we did our due diligence review outside of Kazakhstan. And by December the 6th, Pearl Harbor Day, I flew back from Milan to Kazakhstan, and with a sales and purchase agreement, 250 pages of it. And I said to the shareholder, I said, Vud Pajalister, here's your shareholders agreement. Paka, I'm going back to Hong Kong. And he says, wait, you can't go. We have to apply to the National Bank. for permission to be a bank holding company. So I said, okay, I'll stay. So I stayed in Kazakhstan from December until March. We went back and forth with the National Bank. The National Bank was very concerned because the previous owner of ATFBank was the biggest bank in Italy, Unicredit Bank of Italy. And he said to me, he says, Tony, you know, how can we be sure that with the change of ownership that you will keep the high standards of Unicredit Bank? And I said, Mr. Marchenko, he was the governor at the time, said, Mr. Marchenko, I can give you assurance we can keep all the high standards except one. And he says, except one? Which one? I said, well, the previous CEO was 2 meters tall, and that's a standard that I cannot reach. So anyway, he decided to allow us to buy the bank, and we bought the bank, and by which time all of the Italians, all of the expats said they're going back to Europe. So Mr. Marchenko said, who's going to run the bank? And the shareholder says, Tony. And I became a banker by accident. Initially, I was supposed to be here for 6 months. At the end of 6 months, we had the first devaluation of the tenge in 2014. And the shareholder says to me, look, you better stay, keep control over this situation. And I said, okay, we'll stay there. And then we had another devaluation in 2015, in August. And he says, you cannot leave. You have to stay here. So now I've been here since the 1st of May 2013. So it's almost 6 years. And it's a very, very long time. People always ask me, they say, spent 6 years in Kazakhstan, do you like it there? And I said, look, people, if I did not like living in Kazakhstan, I wouldn't be here. I love it. Why? Because Kazakhstan reminds me so very much of Australia, where I grew up, my formative years. It's a big country with a small number of people. People in Australia at that time was maybe about 12 million. In Kazakhstan now about 18 million. Huge land area, very rich in resources. Oil and gas and copper and iron and so forth. But the most important thing that Kazakhstan reminded me of is the people. The hospitality of the Kazakhs and the hospitality of the Australians. And this is one of the reasons why I love living here. Unfortunately, I still don't speak Russian. I've been here for 6 years, but the only reason, I was telling one of our your colleagues before, that I was able to run this bank is because we had a lot of KIMEP alumni working at the bank who spoke perfect English, and that allowed me to run the bank. So this is my journey from Hong Kong, through Australia, through Southeast Asia, my journey from being a computer programmer to an auditor to entrepreneur, stockbroker, and now banker, and journey to the West from Hong Kong to Kazakhstan. Yeah.